there are some amazing matchups that you are going to get. I mean, we're getting Florida State and Notre Dame right off the bat, Georgia and Clemson. Those games are going to be telling. I mean, you're looking at teams like Texas playing Louisiana, Texas playing Arkansas. It's a lot of different things that you're going to get in those first couple of weeks of football. This is what I would say. If you don't like the names that are playing, if you don't like these teams because you have a hatred, I hate Texas, but I will say this right here. Watch those games because you're not going to be able to go out there and just run vanilla plays. You're going to have to go into your playbook a little bit. You're not just going to be able to go out there and just say, I'm way better than these teams. I will say, OU has, I feel like, kind of some cupcakes with Tulane and Western Carolina and Nebraska. But they're still going to run things that OU is going to have to be able to account for. You're going to be able to look into some of these schemes that these teams are going to be running this year. Another game, Ohio State against Oregon. You're going to be able to see what a lot of these teams have in their bag. So, I mean, people be excited for college football coming back.
Yeah, that Ohio State-Oregon game, that one right there is so fun because it has such big implications for the Pac-12 as a whole, because Oregon is in a position where they're almost carrying the hopes of that conference until USC can get right, which USC recruiting great. I want nothing more than for Helton to figure that out, but that's a conversation for a different day.
So here's an interesting spin. This is why I want to take this. Just bear with me, okay?
Gotcha.
So I want to say, okay, we talked about OU big games for OU. Let's look at the big games for these teams throughout the year. Okay, you look at Georgia and you say you got Clemson right off the bat. Like I said, people, that game is going to be telling. You're going to see, look, the cat's out of the bag. They can't hold any punches again in that game. Okay,
game one, and I could argue that that's a top 10 most impactful game of the college football season. Yeah. We're getting game one.
And then So you got Clemson, neutral site, Arkansas at home, Auburn on the road, and then I think probably the Florida. Those are the games for Georgia. So those are their toughest games. Toughest games for Clemson. Obviously, we just talked about Georgia. At North Carolina State, I know people are laughing at me right now. Florida State at home, and then at South Carolina to end the year. There's a lot of excitement out there in South Carolina. I mean, the Gamecocks are looking kind of revved up right now. Beamer ball is back, right?
Yeah, they get Beamer. That is something for sure.
Then you look at Ohio State. Here's another game. Ohio State, their first two games. They can't hold any punches, people. That's a night game that they play at Minnesota. Now, a lot of people say, there's a bunch of people who say, oh, this is going to be a walk in the park. Look, I'm going to say this right here. I have no doubt Ohio State will make the playoffs because I'm a big fan of C.J. Stroud. I think C.J. Stroud is the next big thing. But even if C.J. Stroud isn't that guy, I think you have a guy there who could step in and help you not miss a chord. Not Jack Miller, but Kyle McCord. So when I watched that, I watched Alabama and Ohio State's spring game, and I left in awe because I looked at Bryce Young and I said, well, he's better than I expected. I think he's going to have a really good year this year. And we'll touch on them later. But when I watched Ohio State, I said, man, CJ Stroud and then Kyle McCord, they looked the part. I mean, they were slinging that rock out there. I was like, hey, those two are going to be the ones that you're going to fall camp saying it's really between those two. It's CJ Stroud's job to lose, but if he does lose a job, I wouldn't say it would be Jack Miller. I would say it would be Kyle McCord because Kyle McCord was slinging that rock out there. But okay, so you got a night game against Minnesota. You come home against Oregon the next week. That's probably one of your other top 10 most impactful games. Especially, you got Ohio State can lose that game and still run the table. But if Oregon loses that game, they have to pray and hope that USC and Utah are good.
They have to have a lot of hopes.
Yeah. and that they don't drop a game to Arizona State or Arizona or somebody like
Well,
that.
that some of those other top 5 teams drop games as well. You're going to need multiple teams to start dropping games.
Yeah. Then you come home against Ohio State is home against Penn State, and I'm not sure. I think are they home against Michigan? No, I think they're.
I haven't seen where Ohio State plays Michigan this year, but I have a whole spiel on Harbaugh. That
oh yeah, he's that
old khaki pants
clown. CLOWN clown. Anyways, then for Alabama. And this is where it gets interesting. Alabama has a really interesting schedule. I think they may have one of the toughest schedules in America. Say what you want to say about Miami opening up. You got to go, I believe.
We go to the swamp, yeah.
You got to go to Florida. At A&M. Obviously, you got LSU. And then you got Auburn on the road to end this year. But here's one more game. Here's one more game that I want Alabama fans to pay close attention to.
Okay.
At Mississippi State. I just wanted to put that in there because and I took a second to actually talk because I want to try to hear the laughter coming out of your audience right now. The reason why I put Mississippi State on there is because only God knows, but no mere mortal on this planet knows what the hell Mike Leach is doing out there with that team. Okay?
That's so true.
Knows. Nobody knows. So I wanted to say, like, because I've said it, I'm on record for saying it. I'm giving Lane Kiffin and Mike Leach 2 to 3 years before they start messing up seasons for the big boys in the SEC. That's just my opinion. They're both great coaches in their own right. I know saying great about Lane Kiffin, that's a stretch, but he's a great coach. But I don't know. I just look at that schedule and I say, man, you got at Florida, at A&M, LSU, on the road against Auburn, but at Mississippi State, I mean, that's just kind of like one of those games that you could overlook on your schedule. So the reason why I went through all of that is just to say those are the schedules for the top teams. And when you look at that, you're saying it's a slam dunk why they're the top 5 teams in the nation. I mean, in the nation, because you're looking at those teams and saying you guys have realistic chances of going to the playoffs, if not winning the playoffs. You look at Georgia's schedule, and Georgia has a pretty soft schedule this year. Depending on how Arkansas is and how Florida plays this year with a new quarterback, you're kind of saying, I mean, you guys should be able to beat Auburn. And you're looking at Georgia and saying, okay, if you want to like show your stuff, then you got to beat Clemson. Then you're looking at Clemson and you're saying, I mean, besides Georgia, at North Carolina State, Florida at home, and then South Carolina, I mean, they have pretty much the easiest schedule in the ACC. So you're looking at them and saying, okay, well, you're gonna have to beat Georgia. You're gonna have to show us all the way through. It can't just be here and there, but you're gonna have to show us all the way through that you're dominant. Then you're gonna have to probably go out there and beat North Carolina to make the playoffs.
They can't drop a game.
No, they can't drop. They have no room to drop a game. That's the reason why I always say, besides Clemson, who else is in the ACC? So it's hard for me to sit there and say that it goes to SEC, the ACC, and then the Big 12. I'm like, the Big 12 is from top to bottom is way better than the ACC.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that if I was to rank, I'd put Clemson ahead of OU over the past few years, just because Clemson has a national championship. I have to defer to rings, right? No doubt.
Bias, that's fine. That is fine.
Yeah. Obviously in the playoff era, because if we're talking about history, OU is, I mean, what do you say? But I couldn't agree more. Outside of Clemson, the ACC, I don't think is any better than the Big 12. And I would actually put maybe the Big 10 as the second best conference, just because I think that there's excellent coaching out there. Pat Fitzgerald at Northwestern is a super solid coach. Franklin, Ryan Day, PJ Fleck. I mean, you have so many great coaches out there at the Big Ten. Now, Ohio State has ran it, much like y'all have ran the Big 12, but I think that the depth of coachings out there are really interesting.
I go back and forth because I think that when you talk about it, if somebody asks the question, is the Big 12 better than the Big 10 right now? You can't say that right now simply because it's always a thing of, are those teams actually winning? So if you go through another year, Penn State being down, Wisconsin playing mediocre, and then, obviously like Minnesota, Maryland, and those teams right there are kind of creeping up a little bit. Look, we all love a Cinderella story. We all love a good heartwarming story. That's what Northwestern is. But let's just be honest. If Northwestern is playing Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game, you're most likely saying, yeah, somebody screwed up out there pretty big this time. So, so the Big 12 was better than the Big Ten last year. Okay, hopefully we can carry that momentum this year. But when you look at these schedules, you're looking, and I think that Bama, just like OU, they're going to have some of the toughest roads to the college football playoff, simply because, those are tough games.
That actually gets me to one where, as we're closing down, the last thing I want to talk about, I think we've already kind of established my 4 playoff teams are going to be Alabama, OU, Ohio State. And I want to have y'all on after, especially that Georgia Clemson game. We're going to have to do this again after that. I'm going to say Clemson for now, but it could easily be Georgia depending on the result of that game. But for right now, my 4 are going to be OU, Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State. So my question first off to you is, what are your 4? I think they're probably much the same depending on Clemson, Georgia. My second question is, we talked about Clemson and we say that we don't think that they can drop that game to Georgia and still make the playoffs. Do you think that Oklahoma can afford a regular season loss this year and still make the playoffs?
Excuse me. Hell no. Excuse me. Let me say that one more time. Hell no. There's no way. There's no way. Not with the expectations that you have this year. This is the problem with OU every year. And this is what I hate. I hate being in the situation. I hate calling my uncle up and saying, hey, how do we make the playoffs this year since we just dropped the game to Podunk State? And my uncle says, all right, Chris, well, here's what we do. We got Iowa State, which is ranked 12 right now. We got Baylor, who is ranked 25. We got Texas, and let's say they lost the Texas game. We got OSU that's ranked 18 right now. Okay, as the weeks go on and some teams lose, because there's always chaos, especially whenever we have that separation Saturday. Baylor moves to 15. Iowa State moves to 4. Oklahoma State moves to 10. You see where I'm getting at?
Yeah.
Now you're saying, okay, well, hopefully they win that game next week against K-State so they could be ranked number 8, because then guess what? That's a primetime game on ABC, and then we'll get that, and then voters are going to look at us and be like, oh, OU's turn the tide. I hate being in that situation. OU, we can't be in that situation this year. It's been so long. It's been too long since OU has had an undefeated season. Undefeated season as a whole. They've done it not as of recent, but it may have been as of recent, as far as having an undefeated season inside the Big 12. But as far as just going undefeated as a whole, we need every game this year. I want to see that. I'm not saying that you got to go out there and shut everybody off, but just, to answer your question, no, you can't afford a loss in the regular season this year.
And I completely agree. And the reason is my first thing is what this game is, right? And I don't mean the game of football. I mean the game that's being played trying to get into the college football playoff.
Yeah.
you don't want to have the argument in anybody else's hands. And unfortunately, when you lose a game, unless you're losing to a top 4 opponent and it is a close game, you're putting the argument in other teams' hands. You're putting your fate in other teams' hands. For instance, if OU goes out there and loses, there might still be a path to the playoffs, but you're putting your fate in the hands of Ohio State, Alabama, A&M, Georgia, Clemson. You're hoping that upsets will come along the way and other teams start dropping games. That's not where you want to be. And I think the thing you brought up, because OU has such high expectations going into this season, I wonder how damaging a loss would be to the perception of OU this season if it happened in the regular season.
The only loss that you could possibly take this year, and it wouldn't be it would just be a blip on your schedule, would probably be the Iowa State game.
That's the only thing I can think is if you lose to Iowa State once, get them in the championship and beat them. But I think also, once again, you'd have to hope that Iowa State looks fantastic throughout the year.
You have to. These last few years that OU has been able to make the playoffs, we've had to do what I just said that I talk about with my uncle, and then also on Championship Saturday, not bowl games, but all the conference championship games are being played. We have to hope that Alabama takes care of whoever is playing and whoever they're playing against. And we say, okay, well, now that Georgia's out, now that LSU's out, now Texas A&M, now whoever will. But we say, okay, we're in the playoff. So now we say, okay, so where are we going? We're either going to Florida or Cali, just one of those two, as like option A. And then option B, we could go to Dallas. So now we got to tune into the Big Ten championship and the ACC championship and hope that Pitt will beat Clemson, and hope that Wisconsin, Minnesota, or Northwestern will beat Ohio State. That way we can get into that, instead of being a 1-4 matchup in Florida or California, we can go to Dallas to be the 2-3 matchup, which never happens.
Yeah.
So,
this game is so fickle, right? And I think that you have to have such a good schedule to be able to comfortably drop a game. And unfortunately, unless TCU is great, great relative, of course, unless Texas is very impressive, the Big 12 would have to be very good to be able to drop a game, right? And that goes for the same thing in talking about the ACC, and right now even the Big 10, and we don't even need to talk about the Pac. If you drop a game in the Pac,
you're done.
You're done. That is what it is. But I completely agree. It's why I wanted to ask. And just outside of that, at the end of the day, which 4 teams are making the playoffs?
I got OU. I have Alabama. I have Ohio State.
That's the tough one.
I'm going to mark in 2 names.
Okay.
Not going to be popular by any means, but here's 2 names: Clemson and Cincinnati.
I like it.
Clemson and Cincinnati. My only fear with Cincinnati is the fact that they lost their defensive coordinator. I know that Fickell is a great defensive mind himself. That's been his calling card, especially when he was at Ohio State. But with Ritter and just everybody talks about Iowa State. What about Cincinnati? They're just as loaded with veterans as well.
They got dudes.
There were a bunch of teams who you could say you wouldn't normally say, oh, they're loaded with talent, but they're loaded with veterans. They're loaded with guys that are experienced. Some of these guys are playing their 6th year of college football. These are grown men. So you're looking at Cincinnati and you're saying, look, if they don't miss a chord on the defensive side of the ball, they can make some noise because outside of Memphis and UCF, I don't know anybody else in the. I think they're an American conference. I don't know anybody else outside of that, or I don't know, Conference USA, American, whichever. I don't know anybody outside of Memphis and UCF that can really compete with them and keep them from making the playoffs.
Yeah, and they were right on the precipice of it last year. They looked so good in that game against Georgia ultimately pulling it out. But I think in a game like that, Cincinnati already having confidence, but now they know we can play with these dudes. Like we have something. So I love that Cincinnati one.